we have invited the distinguished guest specifically from the government of Indonesia. So this topic would focus on how to facilitate the CCS, CCUS project in Asia and the Pacific region. So let me start first from the opening remark. The Director, Emerging Areas Team, Energy Sector Office, Ms. Cindy, please.
Thank you very much, Atsu. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to our dear participants, wherever you are in the world. Distinguished guests, welcome to this 8th edition of our Emerging Areas Knowledge Sharing Series. This month's event focuses on carbon capture and storage, or CCS, also known as CCUS, carbon capture and utilization and storage, as a key emerging technology for achieving net zero, using Indonesia and the UK as case studies. Despite its potential, there have been no CCS or CCUS projects financed by ADB since 2010. Some attribute this to the lack of viable business models for CCS, while others are skeptical about its technological readiness, like carbon storage and the absence of relevant legal and regulatory frameworks. However, after over a decade of supporting our developing member countries' CCS development, we now see changes in the surrounding environment of CCS services, especially following COP28 in December 2023. Many recognize that CCS technologies, including carbon pipeline and storage, have a proven track record. International organizations such as the International Energy Agency and the US Department of Commerce have published handbooks on CCS legal and regulatory frameworks for policymakers. New business models like regional carbon capture storage hubs are also emerging in Indonesia and Norway. Today, I hope we can discuss how international financiers like ADB can facilitate CCS development in Asia and the Pacific. I look forward to the presentations and in engaging discussions during the Q&A session. Thank you and welcome to this webinar. Over to you, Atsu.
I'm honored to introduce today's distinguished guests who are leading in the CCUS industry and pioneers in the carbon market design. Our first speaker, Dr. Tony Tsam, will provide an overview of global CCUS development and discuss the pivotal role of CCUS in achieving net zero emissions. Dr. Tsam has been at the forefront of the CCS industry over a decade, having served as an expert advisor for the Australian government, as well as a lead consultant for the former ADB's CCUS technical assistance for China. Our second speaker, Ms. Chitra Piambodo, is a senior energy specialist at ADB. Her presentation will review Indonesia's carbon market design and discuss how to generate carbon credit from CCS and CCUS to offset investments, following the progress made at last year's COP29. And thirdly, we are honored to welcome our distinguished speaker from the government of Indonesia, Ms. Diopani Swandri Putri, Director of the Indonesia Carbon Capture and Storage Center. The government of Indonesia aims to be Asia's regional CO2 hub, leveraging the country's vast CO2 storage capacity. Ms. Dio's presentation will delve into why CCS is a critical component of the country's energy transition and outline the country's effort to create an enabling environment for CCS services. She also serves as the government's focal point for ADB's ongoing CCS technical assistance. Our final speakers, Dr. Mark Bloomfield and Ms. Sarah Paul from Ricardo, will highlight the UK's CCUS efforts, including bio-CCUS technology aimed at achieving carbon negativity. Their presentation will also address the environmental impact of CCUS and proposed countermeasures. The UK has long been at the forefront of CCUS, engaging in extensive studies of business models and implementation strategies. So now I'm excited to hear the presentation. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Tony Tsam. So Dr. Tsam, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Esso. And good afternoon for those in Asia Pacific, and good morning, Sarah and Mark from Europe. And so thank you very much for the invitation to share my observations on CCS and development. So I have been working on CCS since 2008, and so it has been a long journey and lots of up and downs, and working with different organization companies, including ADB, and has given me a mix of good experiences and perspectives on CCUS development in Asia Pacific, but also across the world. Today, basically, I hope to share some of my observations and with everyone. And this is not, I mean, formal advice or whatsoever, just some personal views, personal observation. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen, Asu? You can see my screen, yeah?
Yeah, it's perfect, Tony.
Okay, thank you. As we introduced, so basically I cover the carbon management and energy transition for Asia Pacific and at Capital Client Energy Advisory and Baker Hughes. So first up, I mean, as you and I discuss about this, the first thing come to my mind is, and so it sounds like two simple questions, right? So why do we need CCS? What does CCS do? And I mean, despite being working on CCS for the past, I mean, more than 15 years or so, and so I still ask myself this question because I work on different projects around the world, and so you do feel these challenges. And of course, from high level, there are three ways to reduce emission to reach net zero: avoid by switching to renewable energy or other energy sources and or other production routes. You don't involve hydrocarbons, so with no emissions. And then this one, CCS has no role to play. And for the second is reduce. For this one, CCS does have a role to play. So basically for large stationary emitters, be it power, steel, cement, fertilizer, and also most recently, data center, especially with the rise and rapid growth of AI, and the electricity demand will increase rapidly. We have already seen the trend around the world. And so, which means the dispatchable stable power supply is going to be key. Of course, CCS could play a role in that. Then the large mobile emitters, for example, onboard and shipping onboard carbon capture. So a few years back, 10 years ago, these probably people think this is like a dream talking. But now we are seeing serious efforts by a lot of corporations and to work on this field. And so, of course, to reduce emissions from large emitters, the critical question is, well, how long and will these assets run? That's why we always, when we evaluate CCS projects, always first is the stickiness of the emitter. Is how long will this emitter be there? With power station, steel plants, will the carbon production process continue? And so will these assets be shut down and in the near future? And so all these different questions to be asked. And so after avoid and reduce, the third pillar and about net zero is remove CDRs. And so clearly, I mean, so direct air capture and so with storage or utilization via mineralization, and so that is one. And the second is BECCS. I'm sure Mark and Sarah from UK will share a bit more on that. And so So basically, these are the high level the role of CCS play. But in reality, most of the projects happen so far around the world are not to these sectors. Is typically right now still associated with upstream operations, and especially with gas production. For example, in Australia, so the most planned CCS project is about the CO2 from reservoir CO2, from reservoir gas. And Australian government made that a legal condition. And for energy producers, they need to equip CCS to inject the reservoir CO2. And but that said, we have seen more and more projects coming into the pipeline and in this others outside oil gas sector, outside upstream. So after, I mean, asking ourselves the question about the role of CCS, but the next question is, okay, are we ready to do it at a larger scale? What kind of capacity do we need? Is government ready? Corporate ready? And do we have the technology? And what roles, exactly like Cindy and as we mentioned, what roles can multilateral banks play? And so despite all these setbacks, these challenges, and I think in the past 2 decades or so, we have seen governments across the world starting to establish specific authorities, ministries, departments, regulators, and basically to design or in charge of CCS policy formulation, and also have the power to be the have the regulatory oversight. So that, for me, I think that's good, big progress. If you look at 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's a very different situation because you have to have this in place before you can move ahead with a large scale deployment. And now that's from government side. And so, of course, on government side, you always need to have the policy and other things ready. I'm not going to go into these details today. From corporate side, the positive signal is now we see a lot of corporations in the upstream oil gas companies, they have set up new energy arm. And because CCS industry is very, I think its expertise requirements very similar as oil gas companies today, which means this is a no-brainer for them to develop this business. And I think this is very important, which means this is considered by the oil gas company as a new growth pillar for the future. And so now for the power steel cement companies, which I have dealt with quite a few in my day-to-day work. And so we're also happy to say they are building up the CCS teams as well. But these companies, they do lack a lot of expertise needed to develop CCS projects. And there are significant expertise gaps. And I think it's a challenge for these companies. And now, and then on financing, so commercial banks. So I mean, in the past, about 3 years, I have had many meetings and projects with commercial banks, and I wouldn't say okay there are hundreds of them financial deals. No, they are not. But if you say is there one or more, I would say yes, there are commercial deals and for CCS project offered by financial commercial banks. And so basically this commercial financing sector, they are looking at and how can they provide finance, how can they develop products to support CCS deployment, and then insurance. So also similarly, 10 years ago, I remember I had the conversation with a major reinsurance company in Europe. At the time, just nothing's happening, and they don't know what product to design. But now you talk to some major insurers, they already have commercial insurance products available for long-term liability and of CCS projects. So that is also a big progress. And data centers, and that's another, I think another new area. And I'm very glad to see some of the digital giants, they are moving into this space as well. And because they do need a lot of low carbon energy to build up the data centers, to run their servers. And so they have set up different teams as well. So these from corporate perspective. And then, so Cindy, opening, you always mentioned technology. Do we have the technology ready to use? On the high level, obviously, yes, we do have the technology. They are commercially available, and but we do also recognize there are a lot of space for improvement, efficiency, cost reduction, and other things. More environment-friendly process, for example, and so these issues are across the different segments along the CCS value chain, from capture to compression to transport to storage, and also to monitoring, measurement, and verification. Actually, just this week, I have quite a few discussions with a few product operators. They talk about, okay, how can we develop better technology and to meet regulatory requirements, and but to reduce our costs for MMW. So I think this is going to be very key area for technology innovation and to support large-scale CCS deployment. But again, with the capture side, of course, I mean, many companies and many countries as well are putting a lot of efforts to develop new technologies, more environment friendly, less energy consumption, lower capital cost. I think that's basically a lot of things are happening, and I do believe the market building up, and eventually the competition will drive companies towards high efficiency, lower cost technologies. Now, the last point I put on here is multilaterals. So what can multilaterals do? And for me, I have been involved in quite a few projects with ADB and other multilaterals and some other international organizations. And my personal view that it's I think for multilateral like ADB has a very significant, probably critical role to play. And I mean, something comes to my mind when I ask myself this question is, well, ADB advocator? I think it is. And capacity building is already doing. From the some project I've been involved in, I can clearly see some of the countries, some of the companies, they have benefited significantly from ADB support. And then the dot connector, what I meant is, I know another colleague going to speak on carbon credits, and so would ADB be able to connect the dot in terms of the carbon credit offering to help to build up the commercial model for CCS products? That's one. Of course, the other one is always to connect the different parts along the CCS value chain. And because of ADB's I mean, very broad coverage across different sectors. And so now, of course, the low rate finance, that's always attractive and for companies. And again, these are some of the preliminary thoughts about how ADB can support. Again, in different countries and in different industries, I think they would take different forms. So I mentioned earlier about CDR. The reason I mentioned CDR is that CDR, in many developing countries especially, and there are no sufficient policy to support the CCS projects. And but there's with some rare exceptions, for example, like CDR, provided you have the right and regulatory framework and methodologies, it is possible to deploy some of the CDR projects in developing nations where you can line up the stars. And so because on the voluntary market, you could get a very high price for the CDR, for basically direct air capture credits. And so I have worked with quite a few projects in this space and quite a few company product developers. And so this market is growing fast to the extent some people think there may be bubbles already. And but this area we clearly see significant efforts in technology innovation. And I mean, to do this, you do need available of renewable energy or nuclear energy, particularly low carbon energy. You need to have good storage facilities, and at least a few, for example. And so Cooper Basin in Australia, so the Permian Basin in Texas, the Alberta, Arun in northern Sumatra, and these areas. And so you do need the proper commercial frameworks, which really heavily rely on the voluntary carbon market. And because the compulsory market, the price is too low, is unable to cover the cost for direct capture. And financing for direct capture, I think it's much easier to get finance than other type of CCS project, to our knowledge so far. But of course, a lot of financing for direct air capture project are more fall into the categories of venture capital instead of commercial banking. So yeah, this area is really growing fast, and also with the European maritime decarbonization rules, and so there's possibility to combine direct capture and with non-biological renewable fuels, such as e-LNG, e-methanol, e-diesel, these things, where if you do have the low-cost renewable energy available, you have the storage resources, that's possibility you can develop these e-fuels, which you can sell at premium price to meet the European maritime decarbonization requirements. The BECCS, I'll just lightly touch on this, and I think BECCS, there are a few major BECCS product developers, and I think one challenge they always face is sustainability, and I'm sure you have noticed some of the company from time to time they got criticized by the media. So sustainable sourcing of biomass, I think that's a key challenge for BECCS developers, and then there's the scalability issues as well, and so yeah, these are some of the challenges. So now coming back to Asia Pacific, as I also mentioned, I have worked on a few TA projects and in China, in PRC, and now on a positive note, clearly, and in the past few years, CCS technology has transformed, and in terms of the high-level position from a strategic reserve technology, is now be considered, or in government documents, is a strategic technology, and that's what we see now in the power sector, especially in China, and so it's most of the major power companies in China are working on CCS projects and CCS technologies, and very soon this July, China will commission the world's largest CCS project for coal-fired power station. And for hard-to-abate sectors such as iron, steel, and cement, we're clearly start seeing value chain collaborations to support CCS projects in these sectors. And so again, some high-level sharing about China itself. You can see I draw a line and around the center of China, basically from Beijing down all the way to around Guangzhou, this area. To the east of this line, that's the developed area of China. That's where most emissions are located. But most of the storage areas, which are the blue colors, they are in the west. We're talking about onshore. And but a lot of emissions are still petrochemical. They are, because for logistic reasons, they are all based along the coast, which essentially means, and so storage will most likely go offshore in the blue areas. And so offshore is typically have high cost, and because from a public engagement perspective, it's probably easier. And and then another is basically at least two maps, and one is Southeast Asia, the other one is North Sea. And on the right hand side is about Southeast Asia, at least some of the potential, you can call them potential basins or projects. And so one key anchor, two key pillars for Southeast Asia, I'm sure Indonesia will talk about more about this, is that the transboundary CO2 CCS, I think is going to be very important. And be it from Singapore to store in other countries in Southeast Asia or Australia, and so also from Korea or Japan. I mean, right now there are projects under development already. Some of the projects are at an advanced stage. So I'm sure we're going to see some of the projects start injection in the next few years, which is very, very exciting. And but as I noted, most of the storage are offshore. I mean, there are a few good onshore space.
Hello, Tony. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Actually, this time we tried to stick to the timeline. And
Yeah, no problem.
speak...
I'm just about to finish. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Okay.
Yeah,
thank
no
you.
problem. Yeah. And on the other hand side, basically just I think colleague from the United Kingdom, we're very, very familiar. Again, I think transponder is another feature as well. And So this I think is going to be a lot of commercial and G2G framework. And so this again, I just show, can we develop CCS, CO2 shipping, to something like today we have about LNG. This is the LNG shipping, actual shipping and shipping ships, and as of early March. And so you can see a lot of vessels and moving around the world, right? So, so the last slide basically the thing is the CCS can generate large volume carbon credits. That's why a lot of companies now to look at to monetize subsurface CO2 storage resources. I think that's another key trend we have observed across the world. And yeah, that's the last slide. Also, thank you very much.
Rushing you for the last slide, but we really appreciate
No problem at
your
all.
we really appreciate your overview of the CCUS latest trend, and also thank you very much for your suggestion of the ADB's advantage, which can be utilized to push through this project. So next speaker is the Mrs. Chitora. So she will present and discuss how to link the CCUS with the future revenue streamline, the carbon credit. So the floor is yours, Ms. Chitora, please.
Okay. Thank you so much. I will start with this. So in the presentations that I have today, most of the slides that I explain here is related to the carbon market landscape, initially worldwide, and then specifically to the Indonesian carbon market landscape. And then we'll see with the regulations related to CCUS, and it will be ended by an example of a CCS project in Indonesia. If we talk about carbon market, why it's not okay? So if we talk about carbon pricing, so carbon pricing basically segregated into different mechanisms. First is a carbon tax. Second is carbon trading, of which the carbon trading can be segregated into two types, which is based on allowance or carbon offset based on project based. In this map, or in this slide, we see the carbon pricing map, or the compliance market of the carbon pricing mechanism, which has been implemented in certain region or certain countries. Maybe I try to hold on. Okay, maybe okay, now it's already in the presentation mode. The slide here presenting the carbon pricing map for Asia Pacific, where certain countries, they implement carbon pricing mechanism using carbon tax, and certain countries, the one with this orange circle, they implement carbon tax, and there are also countries that implement a hybrid approach where they implement carbon pricing in terms of a combinations of carbon tax and carbon trading. Why we call it carbon pricing mechanism is basically to tag or to giving a price into the emissions that is like generated on the manufacturing of the certain product. So instead of in addition to like the cost of producing or producing like economic benefit or economic value, the cost of the emissions is tagged into either carbon tax or can be traded as a compliance of getting an allowance or obligatory to reduce emissions, or a hybrid approach using a carbon tax mechanism and the carbon trading approach for certain countries showing in this map. There's another market which is not shown in this case. It's called like a voluntary market, which is currently is not like really linked to the compliance market because it's just a voluntary basis between companies to companies. However, the standard for the voluntary market, which is right now is voluntary carbon standard, they normally use methodology under a standard called Vera and then gold standard. Right now, according to the Article 6 of Paris Agreement, Paris Agreement Article 6.2, each country, when they implement their own compliance system, they can have a bottom-up approach to adopt the methodology of this voluntary standards. So I think like as of now, this is still the only link, linking the voluntary and compliance market. But whether later on the voluntary market can be directly linked in terms of trading mechanism with the compliance market, it is still under question and it's still like under debates in the UNFCCC Conference of Parties discussions every year. So I just would like to highlight that the growing momentum of carbon pricing here, the 7 carbon pricing initiatives implemented or announced in the national level. There are 7 like carbon pricing initiatives. Japan and Singapore employ a carbon tax regime. Kazakhstan, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, and PRC have launched national ETS. Indonesia has announced to implement a hybrid cap and trade and tax system. What is implemented right now, what they have started to implement right now is the trading mechanism. They have issued a draft regulations on the carbon tax, but it's not yet promulgated or is not yet officially implemented. Vietnam, Thailand, and Philippines and Pakistan are considering adopting carbon pricing instruments as well. Next. So this is so now I'm going to like more specifics into Indonesian carbon market. So basically the underlying law that that is a fundamental to carbon credit or carbon market mechanism in Indonesia is the law 16/2016 on the Paris Agreement ratifications. However, the one that really underpinning the implementations of the carbon pricing in Indonesia is the President Regulation number 98/2021, of which that the regulation stipulated that the institution responsible for the overall frameworks of the carbon pricing mechanism is the Ministry of Environment and Forestry at the time. Because right now the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Forestry now is are becoming like separate entities right now, and then also like the regulations of the Ministry of Maritime and Investment. And just to be noted that this ministry, like the Ministry of Investment and Maritime and Investment, is also like no longer it no longer exists. It is no longer existing. So there's also like the new shift of the new government, the shift to the new government starting last year to this year has also brought some question mark and some necessary measures to have a more clarity on how things are going to be regulated in the future. However, at least like in terms of the carbon market in the energy sector, the country has already implemented what they call it like a kind of a pilot carbon trading system since 2022. But specifically on the power plants, like they put an allowance on the coal-fired power plant. What I remember is that pilot will end until like last year, according to the regulation, and they need to have an updated allowance to also include the other types of fossil fuel power plant. But I think like since there's a shift in the new government, there's still I'm not sure. I don't think I have like an updates on the implementing regulations on this carbon trading allowance. And I think like something that needs to be highlighted here is there's also the Financial Service Advisory Regulation number 14, 2023, related to carbon trading to the carbon exchange in Indonesia. So I think in 2023, the Financial Service Advisory institution in Indonesia, authority in Indonesia, has issued a regulation where it is stipulated that the carbon credits, official national carbon credits issued in Indonesia can be traded in the Indonesian carbon exchange. I think that's the key area which is related to the CCS, because it's related to the carbon capture storage from the energy sector. And then this is like the mechanism and the procedures, and then like how it links into national revenue system. I think things that I just would like to highlight here is that according to the existing regulation, this carbon trading mechanism, the national institution that implemented, or like the national company that implementing it, they can claim that actions as a non-tax revenue, and for their carbon offsets through the carbon trading mechanism. So in the national carbon credit mechanism in Indonesia, they have what we call it as certifications under SRN-PPI, of which that this SRN-PPI have a methodology standards, and they have like a kinds of procedures how to validate, how to develop the project, and then how to validate, how to register it under the registry, like the national registry, and then to be verified. And these are the credits that can be traded in the Indonesian stock exchange. What I understand is the regulation also allows a future international carbon credits, but I'm not sure yet like what types of methodology and how it's going to be like linked into the Indonesian registry. But for sure, the one that is already linked is the national registry itself. Indonesia had a commitment to develop a robust carbon market. So the new government also expressed the interest to really boost the implementation of carbon market in the country. And in fact, Indonesia has a long history in developing carbon credits in the compliance market, starting in the Kyoto Protocol regime, where there are several clean development mechanism projects under Kyoto Protocol was registered and also produced carbon credits back in I think like around like back starting like around like 2007, the year of 2007. And then there's also like a partnership through GCN. So Indonesia has a good starting point as an attractive transaction partner. With the institutional and regulatory framework that is already there now, Indonesia can attract more investment, especially if there are already like a future clarity in the future carbon market, and how the national carbon credit system can be linked to later on the international market. And this can also be enhanced by by establishing national strategy and operation manual for like each instrument for both domestic and international market. Right now, IDB is currently supporting Indonesia in enhancing engagement with the international carbon market. I think the carbon market program under like department, the other department in ADB is also working on that. And they also have a facility called Article 6 facility that socialize or like provide a capacity building activities for countries, for developing member countries, including Indonesia, to be well conversant and to be ready in implementing the carbon market in the future Article 6 market, Article 6 Paris Agreement market. So these are the IDB support to Indonesia's engagement with international carbon market. The formulation of a national strategy for engagement with the international carbon markets, including alignment with existing institutional and regulatory framework, formulations of operations manual for engagement with international carbon markets as a day-to-day guideline for key actors in carbon markets, technical capacity building on Article 6 implementation, development of pilot mitigation activities under Article 6 mechanism, and support enhancement of interministerial and other stakeholders coordination. In terms of generating carbon credits from CCUS, this is just a background on an overview of CCS is previewed or is seen in the carbon market in the future carbon market. So basically, considering the size of the CCUS, we could see that there's a potential carbon credit reduction from the technology itself. And then there's a potential that it could be later on traded under a compliance or voluntary market. But the question is, how credible is a carbon credit from CCUS? Especially that, in general, this carbon credit will be generated from oil and gas industries, of which that it is normally perceived as not a clean industrial sector. So based on my understanding right now, there's a voluntary carbon mechanism called VERA that has already issued a carbon credit methodology for voluntary voluntary carbon market for the CCS. However, whether this can be, accepted in each fragmented national compliance market, or whether this can be also adopted under later on Article 6.2, Article 6.4, there's no uncertainty yet. So, and then this uncertainty and also like uncertainty on the global carbon market also right now creates a volatility on the carbon pricing. And the carbon pricing right now is also like the range of carbon pricing, especially in the voluntary market, is not that high. It ranges only maybe like 1 until like around like 10 US per CO2 equivalent. And it really depends on the types of the credit, whether it's generated from nature-based solution or is it based from the energy sector. So there are still like lots of uncertainties prevail in this future carbon credits generated from CCUS. Related to the CCS in Indonesia, President Regulation Number 14 of 2024 provides a legal framework for carbon capture and storage activities, including clear definitions of key terms. Indonesia's Ministers of Energy and Mineral Resources has introduced Regulation Number 16 of 2024 on the implementation of carbon storage activities within a carbon storage permit area. The regulation complements an existing regulation on the implementation of CCUS in the upstream oil and gas under the regulations of Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources number 2, 2023. All regulations here stated that the carbon captured through CCS can generate economic value as SPE GRK. So this SPE GRK is the certification based on national carbon credit mechanism in Indonesia via voluntary or other carbon markets, internationally or domestically, following legal guidelines. So maybe like people will question like, oh, so there's already like a regulation that allows it, but the price and also the willingness of to buy is also depends on whether the demand is large enough to absorb the supply. So this is the last slide. Is the first CCS project in Indonesia. So due to Indonesia's enormous carbon capture, storage, and natural resource potential, foreign entities have historically shown interest in financing carbon projects in the country. British Petroleum CCS projects is called Tangguh Project at Tangguh LNG facility in West Papua, Indonesia. And this project has a storage capacity of 1.8 gigatons of CO2, which is potentially eligible for carbon credits. Say only like this, there's a potential for that. The project aims to sequester around 15 million tons of CO2 in initial phase, and potentially more considering the large CO2 storage capacity of area. So I think like based on this, I end my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chula, for presentation. Always it is not easy to understand the carbon pricing mechanism, but we understand that there is two different markets, such as the voluntary market and the compliance market, and the CCS credit is likely to be traded under the voluntary market. But at the same time, in terms of the revenue opportunities, there are also the two different markets, the domestic markets and the international markets. So hopefully the Paris Agreement 6.4 would work in near future, so that the carbon credit from the Indonesia CCS can be also traded internationally. So next speaker is from the government of Indonesia, the Indonesia CCS Center. So Ms. Leo, I appreciate your presentation today. So floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you, Atsu, for the time. Thank you, Cindy, for allowing us to share about our progress in Indonesia towards our several projects here that is currently ongoing, what is happening in Indonesia, and what to do next, and everything that I can share you for today. So I am Giovanni Marina Putri, you can call me Dio. For the past 3 years, I've been involved in kind of like being a focal point for Indonesia and driving Indonesia to be the CCS sub-regionals. So I work for Indonesia CCS Center as the Director of CCS Strategic Initiatives here. So we are actually non-profit think tank organizations play a vital role in positioning Indonesia to be regional CCS hub, because we work across stakeholders of the CCS value chains, including our national institution in Indonesia, the ministerials and government bodies, the carbon exchange, parliaments, standardization body, and everything related to the national institution. And then our second hand, we work with industry players, in which we are currently partnering with more than 20 corporate members across CCL value chains, including the project developers, transporters, and technology providers as well. And also we work with the global partners, both international and regional. We work with the World Bank, the United Nations, CLDP, Global CCS Institute, and also the regional stakeholders, the government of Japan, Singapore, South Korea, Australia, and any other countries. So we kind of like serving as a bridge among the stakeholders. We kind of like being a central or dot, connecting all of the dots, and then to make CCS happen in Indonesia. And then I just want to show you several, I would say, our successful events for the past 2 years that has been conducted by ICCS Center as well. The first one is our International Indonesia CCS Forum. As for this year, we are going to have the 3rd International Indonesia CCS Forum in this October. So we usually gathered all of the stakeholders globally, regionally, to speak in our event, talking about the regulatory framework, talking about the technicality, talking about the business models, talking about how we can connect all of the stakeholder value chain together in one place in Jakarta. And then for the second one, I also want to announce that we are happy to adopt the ISO TC 265 into our standard nationals, focusing on the geological storage. And then we are currently progressing to adopt the others standardization from the ISO TC 265s. And last year, we also created a roadmap collaborating with the Kemenko Marves, the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs, and also World Bank to announce the first Indonesia CCS roadmap. So we defined the short-term, mid-term, and the long-term, how we can actually collaborate all of the collective efforts to make CCS happen in Indonesia in those terms. And also we conduct several workshops and also seminars to discuss the CCS implementation in upstream, midstream, and downstream, including the chemical industry, cement, steel players, and also the power plants to get involved with CCS as well. And we're also involved in the COP28 and 29, and also the carbon management challenge last year's. And then probably the question is why Indonesia is actually interested to be the regional CCS hub, because we realized that we do have several competitive advantages. Starting from the first one, it is obviously about our vast storage capacity. We can cater up to 600 gigatons of CO2 to fulfill domestic and regional demands. So to give you the context, the 600 gigatons can actually cater for more than 1,000 years of emission from Indonesia only. But if we counted all of the regional countries as well, we can cater up to 200 years for that one. That is the first competitive advantage that I can share you. And the second one is our locations, because we are located between the two oceans. We kind of like having this strategic location position within the Asia Pacific that allows for cross-border or transboundary CCS operations that has been mentioned by Tony beforehand. So we want to kind of like having the viable business models using the CCS transboundary concepts. That is the second competitive advantage. And the third one, because we want to have a very strong downstream industry in Indonesia from west to east locations. So it will be a great potential for low carbon products development, as we want to advance our downstream industry, including in our steel, cement, petrochemical, and everything. We want to integrate all of the industry with the CCS, because as we know that if an industry can integrate their plants into the CCS, they can actually produce a low carbon materials, a blue ammonia, for example, or blue hydrogen, for example, or low carbon cement, low carbon steel. So we want to have that in Indonesia. That is why we know that this is one of our competitive advantage as well. And the next one is about our rapid development, because we do have around 15 pre-projects currently ongoing. Because we already mapped, if you can see here in Indonesia maps, that in the green circle is the location of the storage hub that we have identified. We know that we can have hub in Sumatra, Jawa, Kalimantan, Papua, Indonesia Timur, in the eastern of the Indonesia. And that is why we want to have for each location, we do have several pre-projects that is currently ongoing, either CCS or CCS. And if we total all of the potential investments that will be happen by 2030, it can be up to 43 billions. It is including the investment that will be used for petrochemical industry that has to be integrated with the CCS. That is why Indonesia, we can say that CCS is a license to invest, because if this petrochemical industry is not going to be integrated with CCS, they cannot produce the low carbon products. And this license to invest also been proved in the eastern part of the Indonesia. One of the projects in Masela, Badi, they have to do the CCS for their oil and gas upstream projects, because if they don't do the CCS, they wouldn't have their FID. That is why we also call it as the license to invest or a license to operate. All of the projects is currently under exploration or feasibility study. Several industry players has been initiated this project, including our state-owned enterprise company, Pertamina, PL, and our power plant, Pupuk Indonesia, our fertilizer company, and also several private companies such as ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, Impacts, Mitsubishi, Japex, and everything. So actually, there are a lot projects that is happening in Indonesia. There was the fourth, I guess, competitive advantage that we have, and the last one is obviously about our enhanced regulatory framework. So it has been explained by Ms. Achitrandi before about our regulatory framework, that we do have several regulatory framework that has been in place, including our presidential decree and also our ministerial decree that is shaping the regulatory framework specific for the CCS and CCUS. And I would also be proud to say that Indonesia is the only country that has the CCS center has been established in Asia. So as part of the initiative, Indonesia has developed our carbon capture and storage roadmap, providing a unified national framework for all relevant stakeholders. So we want to cater all of this competitive advantage into one kind of like projects and also roadmap, and we did it last year together with the Kemenkomarves and World Bank. So I think it will be just another explanation, additional information that has been explained by Ms. Achitrandi before, because we set a set of policies and regulatory frameworks to support the CCS deployment, not only about presidential regulation and the ministerial decree from MEMR, Energy and Mineral Resources, talking about the CCS and CCUS, but we do have as well the president's regulation about the carbon economic value. We do have the financial authority regulations that actually regulates the carbon trading in Indonesia, carbon exchange, and also our national standard that I've mentioned before. We already adopted the ISO TC 265, focusing on the geological storage. And also we do have a specific guidelines under SKK Migas. This one is the standards or guidelines talking about the specific project for CCS and CCUS in oil and gas fields, working area for the cooperation contracts operators. And we also progressing in international collaboration partnership with the UN Carbon Removal Lead, the USDOE, the embassy from several governments, and also G2G bilateral MOU for cross-border CCS operations. We're currently progressing towards more specific bilateral agreements with Singapore and also with Japan and South Korea as well. So for the next one, because we do have the advantage as the largest storage capacity in the region, driven by national SOEs. So on the left graph, you can see that our total emission in 2022 versus 2060, we can actually cater around 70% emission that could potentially be reduced by several SOE CCS initiatives here. So we have identified the potential that can be done by 2030 here, by 2060 to cater up to 118 MTPA of CO2 to be catered using the CCS technology. It will be included within our 15 pre-projects and around 45 billion investment in it, and using our storage capacity. On the right hand, you can see that there are several public-private partnership that has been announced. The first one is on the injector part of the injector value chain. We talk about the oil and gas upstream industry, Pertamina, ExxonMobil, Chevron, that they do have several projects. Pertamina and Exxon, they do have in Java. BP, they do have in Tangguh, as been mentioned by Ms. Achitrandi, and also Impacts in Masala, as well as Medco. And then in Aceh, of course, we do have as well in the western part of Indonesia. And all of them are has been initiated by public-private partnerships. This one's if we're talking about the injector part of the downstream part of the CCS value chain. But if you're talking about the capture part in domestic industry, we do have two main players. The first one is our power plant. It is PLN. So they has been announced that up to 90 gigawatt of current PLN capacity will be integrated with the CCS facility by 2040. So there are several initiatives as well from PLN. It is including PLTU Suralaya, located in Java. It is currently ingoing partnership with the Carbon Korea. That is where probably ADB also has supported Carbon Korea to have this initiative. And then the second one is our state-owned enterprise company in fertilizer. So Pupuk Indonesia has announced that they will have several projects in blue ammonia. So they also plan to integrate this project in CCS. The first one, they will be happening in the eastern part of Indonesia. It will be integrated with the Masela or Abadi field with impacts. And the second will be in the western part of Indonesia in Aceh. And there will be lots of blue ammonia project as well in Kalimantan, in Java, and the other part of Indonesia. So if you're talking about the domestic players, I can tell you that we do have several initiatives, but we actually currently focusing on our transboundary CCS because we know that we can activate the domestic. We cannot yet start to activate the domestic market, but we want to start it with the regional market first because we realized that our neighboring countries such as Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, they do have the stick and carrot to the CCS initiative. And they have a limited storage capacity. So we want to create a viable business model because we realize this opportunity. So knowing that they will capture for more than 15 MTPA by 2030. So we want to be ready to get ready of our storage capacity and infrastructure as well, including the transportation, pipeline, and also shipping. To get all of the CCS value chain getting ready by 2030. So by realizing this opportunity to activate the regional market, we have to have the bilateral agreements. This has been stated on the Paris Agreement as well, that we do have to have a bilateral agreements first before we do the CCS transboundary projects. So that is why we're currently progressing on the bilateral agreement. First is the Singapore, because they also have announced the RFP and SHAP consortium, and we know that this will be our first market, and that is why we enhancing and expediting the progress on the bilateral agreements with the Singapore. Because last year we do have the letter of intent, and then the end of the last year, I think our president welcomed the PM Lawrence Wong to affirm the CCS cross-border collaboration. And then we did have a bilateral workshop between coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs and MTI, or Ministry of Trade of Industry in Singapore, in Jakarta. We do have workshop in Jakarta to continue the crucial aspects of talking points for the bilateral agreements, including storage, capture, and environmental guidance as well. So we expect that by September 2035, we do have a formal bilateral agreement completed between Singapore and Indonesia to actually get the first market from Singapore. So this is probably my last slide. I just want to emphasize that for the last 2 years, the CCS has been controlled and coordinated by the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment under Pak Luhut guidance. But because this ministry it's not there anymore in our new cabinet, so it has been restructured. So currently, its function integrated into other ministry to streamline the governance. But rest assured that Indonesia CCS Center will still be the bridge and will be the center of the connecting all of the stakeholders from the CCS from the government part, supporting for the regulatory framework and drafting all of the decree and also ministerial decree as well, and then also talking with the industry players and also talking with the industry players and partnerships, so we can actually gather all of the opinions and also the needs from the market, from the demand, from the supply as well. So the new ministry now involves not only with the coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs, but also with the coordinating Ministry of Food Affairs, Infrastructure and Regional Development, and also for Politics and Security. Because as we know that CCS is a very unique and niche industry that will be involving many industry, including the capture part, the transportation part, and also the injector part. That is why we have to get ready for many of the ministry to be involved in this one. So yeah, that's probably my takeaway message, that we currently advancing and our progress in CSS deployment with the several competitive advantages that has been explained. And also we open to collaborate with all of the stakeholders, including the IADB, to support and expedite our CSS deployment in Indonesia. So thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I give it back to you, Atsu.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Dio, for the very comprehensive slides. And yeah, as I mentioned before, that we are really amazed at how much the government of Indonesia have done the activities to push forward the CCUS. Thank you very much. So the next speaker is from the UK. But here is one request to the next speaker, Dr. Mark. As you may be aware, that we are a little bit running short of the time, especially for the time for the Q&A session. So maybe ask for your favor to a little bit make your presentation a little bit compact. Let's say around 10 minutes. Yeah.
We will be as quick as we can, for sure.
So hopefully
Okay.
you can end by the 4:20 p.m. Manila time. Yeah.
Yes.
Appreciate it. So floor is yours, Dr. Mark.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. So I'm with my colleague, Sarah Foll, and we'll be talking firstly about the UK's experience of net zero and carbon capture very briefly, and then we will introduce some more project-specific information about carbon capture, and with a case study of a plant and looking at some of the other issues that are associated with carbon capture. So firstly, looking at net zero and carbon capture in the UK. So the UK is the first major economy that has legislated for net zero, and the UK is committed to reaching net zero by 2050. And as part of that, we expect to deliver 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 5 years' time. So the important part of this is a government and industry partnership. So government and industry working together to realise the emissions reductions that different technologies can achieve, both in reducing emissions and reducing generation, and also improving and delivering capture and storage technologies, all the different aspects that Tony introduced us to at the start. So we're making good progress. This chart here shows our progress. Right now we're about here. So we're about half the CO2 emissions that we were in 1990, and the aim is to get down to net zero by 2050. But action is now needed across all sectors to accelerate progress in the next few years. So our decarbonisation strategy here is focused on reducing emissions in industrial clusters. And these are areas of the country which account for the majority of industrial emissions, or at least for half of industrial emissions in these different cluster areas here. And these are areas of traditional industry, but where there is the infrastructure in place for investment to improve, to reduce emissions further. And industrial cluster decarbonisation requires a number of different aspects to come together, as we've already heard, on the supply chain side, as well as on the technology side. So fuels, infrastructure, machinery, processes, workforce, and also legislation and regulation and research support to make this an attractive option for industry. So here we see in the UK, this shows by 2040, residual positive emissions are forecast to be about 90 million tonnes of CO2 per year. And you can see that on the removal side, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is projected to be about half of the removal capacity. with a further shortfall from new technologies and other systems of 40. But we have this large contribution from bioenergy. So it does need to be, for a country the size of the UK, we need a substantial deployment of net zero technologies over the next 20 years. So looking back into our history, we had, I think, perhaps a stop-start experience of carbon capture during the last 20 years, during the 2000s and the 2010s. There was a £1 billion GB pound programme at Longannet Power Station here, but this was cancelled in 2011. And then a similar scale programme was also cancelled in 2015. Unfortunately, this was 3 days before the Paris conference, so very badly timed, I think, to send the wrong message. And the aim then was to focus on small investments in nuclear reactors, small-scale modular reactors. I think both of these cancellations occurred because there was a failure to recognise at that time that a long-term investment is needed to deliver a competitive and robust industry. So now we are looking forward to 2035 and beyond, indeed, to establish a robust carbon capture, utilisation and storage market. So the target is to store 20 to 30 million tonnes of CO2 per year by 2030. And the funding programmes then focus on bringing relevant technologies to market to enable this to happen. So we now have two active clusters, two of the clusters that I mentioned earlier, one in the Northwest England and North Wales, and then the East Coast cluster in the Humber and Teesside regions of Northeast England. And in March, about 2 years ago, 8 emitter projects in these clusters were announced. So this is an example of a cement works in the northwest of England, which is part of the HyNet cluster. And then track 2, the second track is also coming through now to follow on the first track of clusters. So the amount of investment and where it's gone. So the UK government is investing in this sector and including funding for both pilot projects and for research into new technologies. There have been a lot of different initiatives over the past 20 years. Here are some examples of where the money has gone or is continuing to be invested, with a particular focus on bringing new technologies so that they're market ready, so that they're bankable, and they can form a sensible part of a government industrial investment programme from both the industrial operator point of view and also from their finance point of view. In 2024, we had a change of government in the UK, and the funding for carbon capture programme was restored. So instead of a £1 billion programme over a few years, the focus now is over the longer term. So a 25-year programme of about £20 billion UK sterling over the next 25 years to support carbon capture projects in the UK. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk about some specific carbon capture technologies. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and hi, everybody. So I'm going to briefly take you through a case study and then discuss some recent research that we've completed as well regarding the mitigation of environmental risks associated with carbon capture technologies. So Ricardo has designed, installed and operated the Biocus demonstrator plant, which uses biomass pyrolysis with carbon capture, utilisation and storage. So this image on the left shows the process of syngas produced by pyrolysis being burned to produce heat and power. However, this is typically only about 50% effective. Therefore, quite a lot of the stored carbon is returned to the atmosphere as CO2, whereas the Biocus plant combines pyrolysis, heat recovery and carbon capture technology to achieve a very high carbon capture rate while also producing its own heat and power. So there are therefore 4 valuable outputs of this technology. So these are shown on the right here. So we've got heat, biochar, power and electricity, and CO2 capture, use and storage. So some real world applicability of this technology is that it might be really well suited to the agricultural industry, where Biochar could be used to improve soil fertility, CO2 could be used to improve yields, heat could be used to maintain the growing temperatures, and electricity could be used for on-site or exported as well. So before I go into this slide very quickly, just want to highlight the 2 QR codes on the right, which can be followed if you've got your camera to hand. Top one takes you to this plants project webpage, which includes an introductory video and gives more information on the plant. And the second one at the bottom shows a time lapse of the construction, which gives some really useful insight into how this type of plant is put together on a practical basis. So the photos on this slide show, first of all, the plant as built and an overview diagram of how it looks, as well as on the right there, we've got a picture of one of our colleagues in front of the wood chip feedstock. So this comes from the waste product of a nearby wood mill. So this is just a high-level flow chart showing the system overview of how the process works. And you can see where each of those 4 beneficial outputs I mentioned earlier are produced. And again, this is just a more in-depth flowchart summary of the whole system. So every component of the plant that you might be able to see in that construction video, you can see where that is in the system. And again, it just highlights where those 4 main outputs are coming from. And then finally on this section, this just shows the timeline of design, procurement, installation, and testing, which even with a couple of planning delays and challenges to overcome, shows that the plant can move from concept to operation within a approximately 2-year time frame. So as I briefly mentioned, we have recently completed a number of research projects looking into environmental risks associated with net zero technologies, and just have a few key points related to carbon capture, which might be of interest to people on today's call. So I think it's important to start by saying that the transition to net zero and low carbon technologies will obviously have a range of benefits to the environment, depending on the technology used and if existing, maybe high polluting technologies are being replaced. But to ensure a smooth transition and to reduce risk and future-proof these technologies, we need to consider the environmental risks associated with these technologies and potential key issues which will need to be mitigated when implementing these. So this slide just gives a summary of potential pollutants associated with carbon capture and storage, looking at this from a perspective of air quality, water quality, noise and lighting, which can lead to impacts on both human and ecological receptors. So just very quickly wanted to note that for carbon capture, it's the amine and nitrosamines from the degradation of amine solvents can cause environmental impacts through both air and water. So that's a key impact of note. This slide just talks about, in addition to the specific pollutant impacts, one of the main issues, as Mark mentioned, is that these kind of technologies are in clusters, and therefore in combination issues related to this technology is a key issue. So this slide just shows an example of some work we completed recently looking into the cluster impacts of nitrosamines in the northeast of the UK and Teesside, which you can see highlighted as one of the industrial clusters circled in the map on the right. And on the left, it shows where the nitrosamine levels could exceed the air quality guidelines in this cluster looking forward to 2040, based on 2 different assumptions about amine emissions. So this impact is entirely based on carbon capture and shows that large areas could be affected compared to a very tight guideline. So this could be a really key area for research and investment. And then just very quickly, final slide from me. While we have identified potential environmental impacts in our research, there is mitigation available which should be applied following the mitigation hierarchy. So avoidance and prevention is obviously the most favourable, and there are both well-established and emerging mitigation techniques for mitigating environmental impacts of carbon capture and storage. Some of these are shown here on screen. And it's key that construction impacts are considered, which could use the UK's IAQM guidelines, which are becoming increasingly widely used for ADB projects. As highlighted, amine issues are key for this technology, so developing lower risk carbon capture solvents may be a key mitigation technique, which could need additional research. And finally, as well as the primary aim to remove or reduce impacts to the environment, the implementation of a good mitigation strategy also supports public acceptance of this technology and improves bankability. So thank you very much for your attention. Please feel free to contact Mark or I after this call if you do have any additional questions through our emails or LinkedIn, which you can now see on your screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark and Ms. Sarah, for the concisely keeping your time. Much appreciate that. And especially we appreciate the UK's lesson learned from the past activities, including the government, the consistent support is the key. And also we appreciate you raising the concern about the captures the material. I mean to be more the health-friendly materials. Yeah, this is something that we also need to consider in future. So having said that, now that we can move to the Q&A session. So far, we don't receive any specific question, but okay, we received some one information. But so first, let me start with the commercial viability of the CCUS. Because this is the kind of the major bottleneck why the ADB does not have the CCUS lending project since 2010. So for this purpose, I have invited the private sector loan officer, Mr. Yoichiro Yoi, and for his view. So let me first introduce him briefly. So Mr. Yoichiro has joined ADB in 2014. Since then, he has built the bank's non-sovereign infrastructure financing operations, mainly in Indonesia. So recently, he's leading the big team of the energy transition, including the geothermal IPP project. Good afternoon, Mr. Yoi. So before starting the discussion, I understand that you already have some questions to the panelists. So please feel free to make a question to whoever you want, please.
Yeah, thank you, Atsu. Thanks to all the presenters. It was very informative for me as well. Tony, thank you for providing the overview of the sector, Chitra for the carbon pricing mechanism, Budio for the Indonesian government's initiative in introducing CCUS in Indonesia, and thanks to Mark and Sarah for their insights from the examples and lessons learned from UK. I want to leave some time for questions from the floor, so I'll just restrain myself to just one comment and one question. So I'm the as Atsu mentioned, I'm the private sector finance guy. And from that perspective, the fundamental sort of question that we always ask in any investment, not only in CCUS but in all our deals and all our kind of sectors that we cover, is fundamentally what is the business proposition, and where's the commercial/financial viability, and to put it more specifically, what is the revenue source to recover the investment on CapEx to install CCUS hardware. Now, I guess conventionally enhanced gas recovery, enhanced oil recovery was such revenue source, right? You basically inject CO2 underground, and using that pressure, you get some more gas or oil. And that incremental sort of production of oil or gas provides the incremental cash flow that pays for the investment on CCUS. Now, obviously, that partly defeats the point of CCUS, because you're taking out some carbon by putting in some CO2 underground. Which I guess is the primary reason why ADB's energy policy states that ADB does not support CCUS that involves EGR or EOR. And then here comes the carbon pricing, carbon tax or carbon credits, which could actually provide the economic incentive to to invest in CCUS for carbon credit. By selling the credit, you can sort of generate some cash, or carbon tax. If the cost of doing CCUS is lower than what you would otherwise pay as tax, then it starts to make sense to invest in CCUS. Now, as Chitra was mentioning in her presentation, at the moment at least, the whole kind of regime of carbon pricing is a bit fluid. Let's see, how all the different regimes, depending on the country, converge or not, and how robust it becomes in the midterm, or hopefully short term, but midterm or long term, or whenever it might be. But that's when I think it might actually sort of make CCUS investment more kind of robust and sort of truly bankable in that sense. Now, I have one question to Ibu Dio, which is that, and I saw some sort of real project being discussed in Indonesia, which is very promising. But my question was, in those sort of examples or planned projects that you mentioned in your presentation, what are the revenue source, or what is the kind of the business model to incentivize the private sector to invest in those projects? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question, Pak Yuchiroi. Yeah, that's probably the biggest questions, right? If we talk about the CCS, so the industry that has to pay is actually the capture part, right? So if you're talking about the power plant industry, so how they can actually make a revenue or profit out of it. So first one, if you're talking about the domestic players in Indonesia, because we don't have our stick and carrot yet. So the business model here is Indonesia, we're talking about the activating the regional market first. So because of our competitive advantage in storage part, so the storage part, we can say that they can have the revenue from the storage fee, or probably if they want to partner with the transportation, they also can gain from the transportation fee as well. So if you're talking about the capture part, the first one is obviously that we can say that the carbon credits, but currently the carbon price is not there yet. So if you ask about the domestic environment regarding the power plant, is actually we're still working on that, because of if we don't have the stick and carrot, we kind of like still rely on the carbon pricing first. So, but it's kind of more like a mandate from our government. If they have to go to our net zero emission plan by 2060. So that is why PLN has the ambitious target to have the 90 gigawatts project to be CCS. But currently they're still working out about how to kind of like having more affordable projects in their part, but that they currently working towards that, and in partnership with some of the private sector as well, for example with the South Korea and Japanese industry as well, to actually reduce the cost in order to have or to gain more profit revenue. So that is the first one. So I think if you're asking about the domestic, I couldn't say much, because we're still working on the carbon and stick incentive for the one. But if you're talking about the emitter players, but if you're talking about the storage player, that is currently being one of the main players in CCS, they can gain the revenue from the storage and transportation fee. And if you're talking about the other industry other than power plant, we're talking about the fertilizer company. So Pupuk Indonesia, they want to do CCS because they can sell their blue ammonia for the markets in higher price, and because they have more or better quality for their ammonia, and they already have the market for that. So the market is there for the low carbon products and the blue products, so they can gain potential revenue out of it. So so that's probably my first attempt to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. Back to you, Atsu.
Okay, thank you very much, Yoi-san and Ms. Dio for the very the core discussion, which is the main part of this discussion. So from my side, may I ask the only one question to the Ms. Dio, the government of Indonesia. So after all, we are the bank and especially the multilateral development bank, but in order to promote or facilitate the CCS project in Indonesia, can you let us know what really exactly you would expect support from ADB? Can be the concessional loan or can be the more the capacity building or the supporting roadmap or whatever. Yeah, I appreciate your candid feedback, please. Are you muted, Ms. Leo?
Sorry for that one. Sorry, is it? Can you hear me clearly? Yeah.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I would say that probably because Indonesia is still on our early stage, is a very early stage in CCS deployment. So we need to catalyze the investment environment, I guess, for the early stage, and also regarding the risk mitigation for the CCS infrastructure. So because this is critical enablers for functioning the CCS value chain and must be in place before the emitters can actually participate in a credible carbon market that has been mentioned before. So I think the preliminary discussion regarding the co-finance for the pre-FID activities such as feasibility studies or FEED for the CCS cluster across Indonesia, I think that would be nice if we can have it from ADB as well. And also I think it was a good initiative from ADB to actually evaluate about the opportunity for carbon market that can account CCS on it, because I think they will offer the credit guarantees for or also a blended finance instrument to attract private capital into CO2 transport and storage infrastructure in Indonesia. And other than that, I think, as you mentioned, your support for expediting our regulatory implementation to enable the CCS integration into carbon markets is also essentials. So because I think without robust MRV and carbon accounting, our project won't qualify for carbon credits, and limiting the investment appeal and market viability. So I think ADB can also assist us in operationalizing MRV system, aligning with carbon market eligibility, and also providing the technical assistance. So yeah, that's probably two of the main support that we can actually hope from ADB that can help Indonesia as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, your feedback is pretty much acknowledged, and we're happy to support. And the good news is we have the ongoing CCSTA for Indonesia. So first we can identify what we can do within this TA framework, and later that we can expand into more activities. So having said that, we recognize the one question in the chat box. So maybe the person might want to directly make a question. So Koyama-san, do you want to ask your question here? Hello. Okay, so let me just read his question on his behalf. So his question is basically to Ricardo, Dr. Mark. His question is, can you please comment on how the UK intends to create a viable commercial financial structure for, okay, so I can read. I'm not so much familiar with these things. Okay, here now I can read. Can you please comment on how the UK intends to create a viable commercial financing structure for CCS projects with appropriate public-private risk sharing, given the complex value chain, appearances from emitters to transport and storage, which could be cross-border, and the long-term nature of a CCS project? For example, how does the UK addresses the risks associated with the suspension restriction of the transport and storage side, or the risk of low demand of the emitter side. So Dr. Mark or Sarah,
Yes.
can you answer to this question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't think we have a very long time, so I can't answer all the points you've made. I think in the UK, a lot of our storage capacity is in domestic saline aquifers. So we don't have the challenge of enhanced removal of gas and oil that was mentioned earlier. And that maybe reduces the risk of transport cross-border issues, but that remains a live issue for us. I think in the UK, we've had a target to reduce CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050, and that's been in place since 2008. And now the target, as I said, is now 100%. But that 40-year timetable, I think, is really important. That gives certainty and stability. Industrial processors know that their emissions need to be progressively reduced in the long term. And in fact, all industrial process operators are now required to produce a decarbonization plan by 2026. So that comes through the regulatory processes. So that's the kind of the regulatory push that they will need to do this. There's the investment from the government in supporting new technologies and market readiness. We expect that will result in higher prices for businesses and consumers alongside other sectors. So, for example, we also expect not that in the UK we won't be able to use internal combustion engine vehicles after 2040, and that will also bring costs. So we are kind of having to share the cost of achieving net zero across all parts of society. But it's that kind of regulatory process that drives individual operators, and that means that at the moment I don't think there is a shortfall in demand. Maybe we'll have to deal with that at some point in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I hope the Koyama-san is happy with the answer. So now we have already exceeding our the time frame. So maybe we could have one more burning question if we have. Do you have any further the question or the comment or whatever? This would be a great opportunity. So if not, maybe we can conclude. So yeah, thank you very much for the distinguished guests and also the participants. This session was really the education and informative, and we learned a lot from this session. And I hope that this session would be an opportunity to initiate a new collaboration. And definitely, I'm sure that we will have it. Yeah. So thanks again, everyone. So let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hatsu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.